Have you ever wondered if we could live on Venus or Mars? What would life be like on these sister planets that are next door to our own? I'm Science Mom.
And I'm Math Dad.
Today we are going to explore and compare the planets Venus, Earth, and Mars. Hello and welcome. A special quick shout out to those who are watching live, including Anya Iverson, who is getting ready to go try out for the National Science Bee. So Good luck, Anya. Hello to Elizabeth and Sam in Cincinnati, Bori and Roddy in Ottawa, Canada, Alicia from Nevada, Emily in Colorado, Mia and Cohen and Abby watching in California, Olivia in Minnesota, Nico in New York,
Cyan in California, Eleanor in Quebec.
Welcome today. Before we talk about Venus and Mars, I want to ask you a question about living on the moon. So this background behind us shows a view of the surface of the moon. If we were on the moon, what of the elements that we've talked about in our class would we have? Remember, we talked about the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the biosphere. Which of those four do we have on the moon?
Okay, so on the moon, does the moon have an atmosphere? I don't think it does, right?
Really, no.
I mean, it's hard for us to breathe here on the moon, but when you're Math Dad and Science Mom, you can breathe on the moon. All right.
Spoiler alert, we're not really on the moon.
Okay, so does it have a lithosphere? Well, it definitely has solid Earth. I just call the moon Earth. It has solid ground, rock, yes.
And that's it. It has a lithosphere, but it does not have an atmosphere.
Or
it does not have a hydrosphere. It doesn't have a system of bodies of water and that are circulating, the water cycle.
And it doesn't have a biosphere.
No. There's nothing living on the moon right now as far as we know. And it would be very surprising, if there were some type of specialized virus or bacteria existing on the moon, that would be a huge shock. We do not expect to find that. So if we were to live on the moon, what would we need? What would we have to get together?
All right, so
I'm seeing Minor Master points out that it has an exosphere. That's an excellent connection, Minor Master, because you're right. It does have just a few trace molecules of gas around it.
That are orbiting it.
They are so thin that to us, it would feel just like the vacuum of outer space. It doesn't have an atmosphere that we can breathe. But let's go back to that picture of the moon real quick.
Okay.
And what would we need if we were going to be on the moon? Well, first, we have to solve the breathing problem.
That's right. We need oxygen to survive. It's just the way of things. So, I mean, we need a spacesuit, but you can't live in a spacesuit forever. So somehow we'd have to have
You'd have to
a
set
moon
up
base
something,
of
a
some
moon
sort,
base.
right?
So here are a couple images that artists at NASA put together, kind of trying to imagine what would it be like to be on the moon. So you would have to have spacesuits anytime you went outside. You would need to have some sort of protection that would have an atmosphere inside it because we have to breathe air. And unfortunately, so the advantages of the moon are that it's pretty close to Earth. It doesn't take too long to get there. And you have a lot of minerals you could use in construction, a lot of elements like iron and titanium and silicon and magnesium and aluminum. But you know what you don't have? Nitrogen.
Oh, no nitrogen.
And what are we breathing?
Well, but we do breathe a lot of nitrogen. That's the most common gas in the atmosphere. But wait a minute. We don't need the nitrogen to breathe, right?
Well, we need something that takes up space that is not reactive.
Something that's not oxygen.
Yeah, and nitrogen is really the best thing. If we were breathing 100% pure oxygen, that would not be so good for us. And also on the moon, we don't have much carbon. So that's the big disadvantage. Really low carbon, really low hydrogen, really low nitrogen. We need those three elements and a lot of radiation. So could we set up a base on the moon? Actually, with today's technology, we probably could, but it would be tricky. And what would happen, let's say that we built a huge dome across a crater, a big crater.
Okay.
And we had silicon glass across the whole entire outside. What would happen, Math Dad, if a little asteroid went boom and made a tiny hole in that dome?
Well, all of the air would escape and we'd be in big trouble.
You'd be in huge trouble. In fact, a couple plans that I read about how you could possibly build something like this, they had little paragraphs talking about how if there was a hole and it couldn't be patched right away, you would have to have an emergency evacuation system that could get everybody underground immediately. And then at the speed of sound, you would have to have these massive coolers that would cryogenically cool down all of the air so it doesn't escape, because it would be really hard to replace the air and you need it.
Oh, wow.
Because otherwise, within seconds, all of the air would just go out into space, and then you would have a huge problem. So living on the moon would be dangerous, exciting, but very difficult because of that atmosphere problem. We wouldn't have air to breathe.
Now, do asteroids or meteorites hit the moon more often than they would hit Earth?
Yes, because if you've ever looked up in the sky and seen a shooting star, the mesosphere is where they are burning up. And on the moon, there's no mesosphere to burn them up, so they just go into
so without an atmosphere to
dust.
slow them down, the moon's getting pounded. I guess that's why it's full of craters.
That is why it's full of craters. And also, it's getting pounded by a lot of radiation. So that's the other thing that's tricky.
Ooh.
The two trickiest things about the moon, actually, about living there that we might not think about is, one, plants can't grow if it's light for 28 days and then dark for 28 days.
Oh.
That's challenge number one. Number two, moon dust, the dust that's all over the surface of the moon, is actually very toxic to us. If you breathe in just a small little particles of those dust, it's going to kill your lung cells and cause a lot of problems.
So it's different than Earth dust, or what's
Yes,
happening there?
There's no erosion. So the small little particles of dust in the moon are very sharp. They have a larger surface area. They're actually different for our cells than dust that is on Earth. But even dust on Earth, if it has a lot of silica in it, can be really dangerous. Have you ever heard of black lung, the disease that miners can get?
Yes.
That's caused by breathing in dust that has a lot of silica. Well, all of the dust on the moon is like that, only worse.
Wow, I never would have thought of that difficulty.
So let's move now from the moon to the next closest planet in our solar system, Venus, and talk about what if we went to Venus? Could you live on Venus? So does Venus have a lithosphere?
So
Rocks?
Definitely a solid planet, yes.
Yes. Does it have an atmosphere?
It does have an
Yes.
atmosphere, but it's some caustic gases, right?
Yeah, so we've upgraded in that now we have an atmosphere that will block out some solar radiation and maybe protect us, but we've downgraded because this atmosphere is actually pretty intense. The atmosphere of Venus is so thick, there's so much carbon dioxide in it, that going to the surface of Venus would feel like going 1,000 meters underwater.
Like from the pressure?
The pressure is that intense. And so if you're on the surface of Venus and you go outside in a spacesuit, you will immediately get flattened like a pancake.
So it has more atmosphere than the
More
Earth.
atmosphere than the
Wow.
Earth, a lot more. And that's what we're seeing when we look at this picture of Venus. And if we were to remove the clouds, and NASA put together a computer simulated image of what it would look like if we removed the clouds, Venus kind of looks like a desolate, frightening, hot place to visit. And it is incredibly hot. Hot enough to melt lead.
That is hot.
So if you went in a submarine type spaceship that was super strong and would not collapse under the pressure, if you had used lead to weld together parts of the spaceship, your spaceship would fall apart after a few hours on the surface.
And have we actually sent spaceships to Venus?
Yes. Yes, there have been over 40 launches to Venus. Not all of them made it there, and several actually did touch down to the surface. A few fell apart and disintegrated partway through before they landed because the temperatures are so hot.
They melted.
Yes, they did. They melted. But the ones that made it to the surface, a couple of them sent back pictures, and this is what the surface of Venus looks like. This has been adjusted and color has been put in artificially just to try and make it a little more accurate because the pictures were black and white. But it would really be like being in a super hot, boiling lake type atmosphere of air. It would not be pleasant.
Fire and brimstone.
So could we live on the surface of Venus? Honestly, the answer is no. I don't think that it would work just because the amount of energy you would need to cool whatever submarine type spacecraft you had would just be so high. It would take so much energy to cool it. But the atmosphere is so thick that a balloon full of regular air that we can breathe would actually float about 50 kilometers above the surface.
Whoa. Wait. It would just float. You wouldn't need to be putting new energy into the system.
Correct.
They would hover there. Huh.
Yeah. So floating spaceships on Venus actually might work.
What?
But where do you get the materials to build the spaceships? And if it's so hard to get down to the surface and get back up, that makes it tricky.
You'd have to send it all from Earth, right?
Yeah.
And we know it's really difficult to launch large things. So.
Super, super difficult. Now, at the beginning of class, before we started, I asked the students in the chat, if you could choose between visiting Venus or visiting Mars, what would you choose? And Zoya and Amy said Venus. I have to say, seeing Venus, just like out of curiosity, it would be pretty awesome to see that planet, but I wouldn't want to stay for too long. And Elena, Diamond Star, Olivia, Ember, Logan, Ibrahim, and so many others said Mars because Venus is just way too hot.
Does seem something of a death trap.
It is very, very hot. So let's go to Mars now and take a look at our next sister planet and what it would be like to live on Mars. So do we have...
So Venus was slightly smaller than Earth, but Mars is even smaller still, right?
It's way smaller. And one of the problems of living on the moon that we didn't talk about too much was just how low the gravity is. The gravity is so low that if you were there for a couple of years, your bones would change. You would lose a lot of calcium from your bones. Your bones would be not as strong. And then if you traveled to Earth, it would be really difficult for you.
Oh.
You would have problems with really weak bones. So the gravity on Venus is just about right, but the days are way too long and the nights are way too long. The year on Venus is longer than a day. But Mars, the gravity is a little low. It's about 38%, but our day and night rotation is pretty close to Earth.
Oh, so you wouldn't be that uncomfortable. At least that wouldn't be the hard part to get used to.
And that means you could grow plants, which is super important. If we can't grow plants, are we going to be able to eat?
No.
The answer is no.
Plants are the foundation of the entire food chain.
They are. So here is a picture of Mars from space. And what would it look like if you were on the surface? Well, the surface of Mars, the sky actually looks a little bit yellowish. It is not blue because this sky is mostly carbon dioxide. Oh. So we can't breathe the air here, but the air would protect us from dangerous radiation.
Wait, if it's carbon dioxide, that's a greenhouse gas. So that should warm up the air. And Mars should be warmer.
Mars is warmer than it would be if its atmosphere was something different than carbon dioxide, but not quite warm enough for us. It's still pretty cold
because it's too thin?
Because it is way too thin.
Gotcha.
But you bring up an interesting question, Math Dad, because there has been talk about terraforming Mars.
So what does this word terraforming mean?
This means taking Mars and changing it from a planet that has very little atmosphere and is all red, rocky, and barren into a planet that has a liquid ocean and could grow plants and could have air that we could breathe. Could we make this happen?
Wow. I'm sure it would take a long time before you'd be able to do that. We better get started now if that's the plan.
Well, the answer is with the technology that we have right now, probably not. This probably would not be possible. There are some real big problems just in how much gas would need to be released. Some of the elements that we would need are already there in the rock. And in theory, you can get those elements to come out of the rock, become a gas. But Mars does not have a magnetic field protecting the atmosphere. So if you did terraform it and you didn't figure out how to artificially make a magnetic field, what would happen to the atmosphere?
It would just dissipate. Yeah.
It would eventually get blown away, and it would take a long time for it to blow away, but eventually you would lose the atmosphere.
And so when you say blow away, are you talking like solar winds?
Yes, the
high
sun,
energy.
The sun is releasing radiation, and that's why Mars doesn't have a thick atmosphere now, because a lot of the oxygen and nitrogen and water vapor and hydrogen, all those elements got blasted away by the solar wind.
Okay, and let's see if I remember this right. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field because it does not have a molten core at its center. Its core has cooled. Is that right?
Yes. Currently, that is our theory. Although we are learning more and more about Mars as we visit there. And in a sense, you could say we've already colonized Mars because we have quite a few robots there exploring.
That's true.
One of them, the Curiosity rover, did a 360-degree view from the top of a mountain that is really quite cool. So we're going to share this real quick. And I did give our moderators the link. I'll drop it in the chat as well, so that if you want to copy it and take a look at it later, you can. It is pretty awesome. And of course, the link will be down in the description as well if you want to take a look. All right, so here we are. And you can just drag around and look. So you're on the top of a little hill here. And you can see the horizon looks kind of dusty. There's quite a bit of dust in the air, and the sky is kind of this grayish, almost yellow color.
But that
But
doesn't
this,
look that similar from a Nevada desert.
yeah, this is an actual view of Mars. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Okay, this is super cool. And I didn't even know a video could do that. This is
The
YouTube.
360 view. Yeah, isn't that cool? So that is just a quick snapshot at Venus versus Earth versus Mars. And in the notes, we're going to go real fast before we do our quiz show, or not our quiz show, sorry, our polls. We are going to go to the notes real quick and just look at page 106. There are a couple quick things I want to point out. Now, the first is that a lot of the difference in temperature, with Venus being way too hot, Mars being pretty cold, and then Earth being just right, a lot of that has to do with just how far away they are from the sun. Venus, there's a habitable zone that Earth fits into. Venus is just right on the edge of that zone, close enough that it gets really hot. Mars is right at the other end, far enough away that it's pretty cold. So if you were on Venus and the clouds were thin enough that you could kind of see the sun, it would look quite a bit bigger than it looks on Earth. And if you're on Mars, the sun looks a lot smaller.
Ooh. So is Mars about twice as far away from the sun as Earth? If I remember right, it's close.
Yeah.
Not exactly. So that would mean, if we think back to our inverse square law, because we had to go twice as far, but 2 times 2 is then 4. So it's only Earth gets 4 times as much light as Mars.
That's right. So we'd be able to grow crops and plants a lot easier on Earth than we could on Mars. But we could set up a settlement on Mars. That's within the possibilities given the technology we have right now, which is kind of exciting. And we've already sent robots there, which is cool too. But again, Mars, mostly carbon dioxide, super thin. It would feel deadly to breathe the atmosphere on Mars. Venus, mostly carbon dioxide atmosphere with clouds of sulfuric acid, but this atmosphere is so thick that it would be like being under a whole kilometer of water. Crazy pressure. And nothing makes you appreciate Earth like thinking about going somewhere else, because really, this is just right.
There's a reason they call it the Goldilocks zone, right?
That's right.
So we've sent probes and things to both Venus and Mars. Which one was first?
The first planet that we ever visited, ever, with a spacecraft was actually Venus.
Okay.
A Russian probe back in, I believe in the 1960s, went to Venus.
That makes sense because it's the closest.
Yeah, it is the closest. And the planet that we have visited the most is Mars. And that's partly because it just is so interesting to us in that we actually could visit there and humans could live there. Probably. Right. It would not be easy, but it's possible.
We can put a robot on Mars that can go around and accomplish some tasks. I mean, that's super cool. With Venus, it's just so hot. I don't think we could count on a robot lasting for very long if somehow we could even get it there intact. Wow.
Yeah. Putting a robot on Mars or on Venus is equivalent to taking a robot and saying, okay, I want you to go to the bottom of a lake that is boiling, that is 100 meters deep, and then we're going to fill it with sulfuric acid. Like that's intense. Not a lot of things can survive that.
No. And to do it so far away, the engineering and the challenge of getting something to another planet is massive, but let alone just trying to get it to survive once it gets there.
For sure, for sure. Real quick, we have some birthdays, and then it is time for our polls. And we did film a special marmoset dance for you guys because we forgot our defeat dance last time. So go to itempool.com/sciencemom/live and get ready to whoop on Math Dad because he's like, no, we're only going to show this if they win, and I know you guys will. I want to give a quick happy birthday to Scarlett from Illinois, who turns 8 this summer. We're celebrating some summer birthdays because our class, this is the last full lesson day of class, and then we have a quiz show Friday. Happy birthday to Lily Games, who has a birthday on May 21st. Happy birthday, Lily.
Cool, Lily.
Max from Ontario is turning 9 on May 10th. Henry turns 9 on May 17th. Happy birthday, Henry. And Caleb turns 8 on July 23rd. And Tegan has a birthday, turns 11 on June 18th. Happy birthday, Tegan.
Yay. So this is great. Lots of summer birthdays, and we'll be announcing some more
we
on
will have
Friday.
More on Friday.
The list is big.
Are you
All right.
ready?
I am ready. So we're going to go to itempool.com/sciencemom/live and start our poll questions.
If a human being were going to live on or visit Venus, which of these structures would be the safest? A steel and titanium dome on the surface, a subterranean or underground tunnel, or a balloon full of nitrogen and oxygen floating at 50 kilometers?
Ooh.
Which would be safest on
Right.
Venus?
So all three of those are really interesting, and you've got to kind of get creative when the habitat is less hospitable.
Adley has a great question about what kind of layers the moon has. And as far as we know, the moon doesn't have layers. It's pretty uniform. There's not like a core and a mantle and a crust.
It's crust all the way down, essentially.
Essentially, as far as we know, there's not a huge difference in composition across the moon.
Because there's no plate tectonics, no lava flow.
It's pretty uniform.
All right, let's reveal our answer. And C is correct. This is the only way we've figured out that we might possibly survive on Venus, and it's not to be down on the surface. And even if we tried to dig a subterranean tunnel, that wouldn't work.
The pressure is still going to be so intense that if you accidentally got a hole in your structure, the whole thing would just implode. That's like exploding inward.
And with great pressure, of course, comes great heat, and it's so closer to the sun. It's got all those greenhouse gases. That's contributing to the heat. Yeah, this is not a very hospitable place. But if we could be up above the clouds, then there's kind of a sweet spot where it's, in theory, possible if we could get the materials there. Although, good luck getting more materials or
it would be tricky
making changes once you're there.
Oh.
All right.
Same question, but now with Mars. If a human being were going to live on Mars, which of these structures would be the safest? Would you want to have a balloon floating in the atmosphere? Would you want to have a subterranean tunnel or a steel and titanium dome on the surface? What would you choose? And I guess we should ask too, on Venus, would a steel and titanium dome be strong enough to withstand the pressure?
Boy, if it was engineered
if it was built
really carefully.
If it was built really well, yes. But the cooling is really tricky because pretty soon it would be like 400 degrees in there and hot enough to melt lead unless you had a really high functioning air conditioning system, essentially.
All right. Revealing the answer here. Ooh, I said a subterranean tunnel, and the chat said a steel and titanium dome on the surface.
Interesting. So let's talk about this real quick, because I think you can make valid arguments for both. The reason why we said subterranean tunnel is because Mars, although it does have an atmosphere that will take care of like tiny little meteorites, most meteorites would actually hit the surface because its atmosphere is not super thick. And so if you're in a subterranean tunnel, then you don't have to worry about a tiny little bit of space rock going shoo and putting a hole in your dome. So that's why I would think subterranean tunnel would be the safest. But if you had a strong dome built out of titanium and steel, would that work as well? Absolutely, it would. So we're going to call both of those correct.
Yeah, and the subterranean tunnel comes with some problems. Then, I mean, to grow the food, you still got to be on the surface. But if we're just saying, put your house down in a cave, then that would at least avoid the obvious smaller meteorites.
Could you float a balloon on Mars?
The atmosphere's not thick enough, right?
No. A balloon of nitrogen and oxygen would sink really fast.
I wonder if a helium balloon would float.
The atmosphere is so thin.
It's so thin, probably not.
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Excellent job, you guys. So we're going to call that a win for the science kids because you can make valid arguments for both.
Just go easy on them, Science Mom. Yeah. All right. Which planet was first explored by spacecraft? Was it Venus or Mars? Which one was first explored?
We had an excellent question from Isaac. Why is Venus hotter than Mercury when it's farther away from the sun?
It's a good question.
And it's because of the atmosphere. It's because the atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide. Where did all that carbon dioxide come from? Rocks.
From rocks?
Yes. Rocks that have calcium carbonate in them actually store quite a bit of carbon. And if there are chemical reactions that cause that carbon to be converted into carbon dioxide, then you can get a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we think that's what happened to Venus.
Interesting. But yeah, one way or another, it's there now, and it's cooking the planet.
Yeah. So all the heat that hits Venus gets trapped and is circulated, retained in the planet.
Would we survive better on Mercury then than Venus?
Oh,
Either way, it's too hot.
the radiation load from the sun at Mercury would really be tricky.
Gotcha. All right. The first planet explored was Venus.
Good job, guys. That is correct.
All right. They got lucky again.
It's not luck, Math Dad.
50-50 chance when you're guessing.
Called unbeatable, unbeatable science kids.
Ooh, here's a good one. True or false? Venus and Mars both used to have oceans.
Ooh, so this one's kind of a tricky pop quiz question. We didn't actually talk about this. So take your best guess. Just what do you think? Take your best guess. At one time, did they have oceans? Let's go ahead and finish and reveal real fast. Pop quiz question, and we think that they did. And let's go back to this view real quick, and we'll just talk about this one.
All right.
So this one also, because it was just a pop quiz question, I was really curious to see what you would think, and also because we're not 100% sure. We're not like awarding points for this one.
But I won.
Mars for sure has had liquid water because we can see the evidence. We can see channels and river deltas and floodplains all over Mars. And it lost its ocean when its atmosphere got reduced and most of it was blown away. And also it got cold and a lot of the water got frozen, and you have frozen water at the poles. So it doesn't have liquid water now. Venus, we think, did have a liquid ocean before that runaway greenhouse gas made it so hot. Because Venus, Earth, and Mars were all formed in similar conditions. And it makes sense that the process that formed an ocean on Earth would have also formed oceans on the other planets because they are so similar.
Well, could there be oceans underneath the clouds right now?
In Venus? No. So there have been enough spacecraft that have gone around that have had instruments that can, use radar to see through the clouds. There's no liquid water on Venus.
It would be too hot. It would all evaporate.
Yeah. And once it evaporates and goes up into the atmosphere is so hot up there that actually the radiation from the sun would split the water apart into oxygen and hydrogen, and then the hydrogen gets blown away into space.
Oh.
So.
Poor Venus.
Poor Venus. No water. All right, Math Dad. We have 2 questions left.
All right. Which planet have people sent more spacecraft to, Venus or Mars? So which planet has had the most spacecraft sent to it?
This is another tricky one.
Oh, I have to accept.
You do. You have to accept the answers, Math Dad.
If they were really talented, maybe they could answer it before I enabled it. No?
No.
Oh.
No. Our IT guy asked a really good question. Could tardigrades live on Venus? Tardigrades are tiny little microscopic animals that are literally the toughest animals, I think, around because they've survived going into outer space. They can dry up completely and then you just get rehydrated and come back to life. They're incredible, but I think at the temperature that will melt lead, a cell is not going to be able to survive because a cell would just start to break apart.
Yeah, it would burn up. Yeah. All right. And
finish and reveal.
The answer is Mars.
Correct. And it's correct. It depends on how you define sending a spacecraft. If you define it just by the number of launches that were intended to go to a certain planet, then it's Mars, but only by 1. And I was really surprised when I researched this and found that we'd sent that many spacecraft to Venus. So back in the 60s and 70s, a lot more spacecraft were going to Venus than Mars. But then in the last 30 years, it's been the reverse. We're sending more things to Mars than to Venus.
Makes sense.
And if you count what's actually landed on the surface, then it's Mars by a lot because we had a lot of failed attempts to get to Venus because it's so hot.
All right.
And
so that's 5 questions out of 6, Science Mom.
That is. So I think the Unbeatable Science Kids did a great job, and they get to see the marmoset dance. And then our final question is, who does the marmoset dance better, Science Mom or Math Dad? It's dance off time.
All right.
Here we go. So that was our attempt to invent a new dance just for you guys. And now you get to vote who did the better marmoset dance. And I have to say,
I think
Matt,
there can only be one correct answer to this.
well, if you made one of the answers correct, that's cheating because it's all what they vote for. That's going to determine it.
So, her feelings won't be hurt, guys. It's okay. She can take it. She can take it. Oh man, this is close, Science Mom.
It is close.
Oh, no.
Oh, we're tied. And it's switching back and forth.
Math Dad was the correct answer.
But Science Mom was the winner.
Oh, she won. Oh, you beat me by a nose, Science Mom.
Just barely.
Just barely. Did you see that we wore our marmoset shirts today?
We did. We wore our marmoset shirts.
Marmoset, there'd be days
Two
like
more.
this.
2 more questions I want to answer just real fast. What color would the sky look from Mars and Venus from Adley? Most likely on Venus, the sky would be kind of a deep yellow color, yellow-orange. And then on Mars, it's a dull orange, like kind of a real darkish, dull orange to white-ish. But it's not blue because there's not enough oxygen or nitrogen. Our blue color of the sky on Earth comes from the oxygen and the nitrogen in our atmosphere. And then Chrissy wants to know, are there any glaciers on the moon, or have there ever been glaciers on the moon? There have never been glaciers on the moon, but there may be a small amount of ice in some of the craters that never see sunlight, because some of the craters are so deep and they're down near the pole that sunlight never strikes them.
Then wouldn't that ice be a glacier?
But it's not big enough to move under its own weight.
Ah, that was one of the requirements for a glacier.
Yes. And then last little note before we go. I know that when you're part of a community and doing something regular and it's coming to an end, that can be kind of sad. And I've seen several comments in the chat like, no, the class is ending. And I want to reassure you, we will have some fun things happening over the summer. In fact, next Wednesday, we're going to have a video all about making bee houses and just the science of bees, which are one of the coolest insects around. And then in the fall, we have a biology class. So we hope that you have enjoyed coming with us for Earth Science, and we want to give a special thank you to our awesome moderators, Science Mom Liza, Science Mom Krista, Science Mom Jamie, and Science Mom Amber, because you guys do such a great job of just making sure that the chat is fun and safe. And Math Dad and I really get a kick out of all the excellent jokes and puns that we see.
And I've got to say, on Friday, our next class, we will be doing a quiz show review that's going to cover the entire course. So this is your chance to show what you have learned. But you guys had better bring your A game. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed. And
we will have a couple more dance-off videos if questions are answered correctly. So make sure you study the atmosphere, because there are several questions on the atmosphere that are a little bit tricky, I will say. So take a look at the notes.
I'm not going easy on them, Science Mom.
Study hard and crush Math Dad. Work hard, grow smart, and we will see you on Friday.